Honda Australia. Good morning, Mr. Collins.
Good morning, Senator.
I can see you. Do you have any other colleagues joining you in giving evidence today?
No, just myself today.
Thank you. I understand you've received information on parliamentary privilege and the protection of witnesses.
Correct.
For the Hansard record, please state your full name and the capacity in which you appear today.
My name is Stephen John Collins and I'm Director of Honda Australia Proprietary Limited.
I now invite you to make a short opening statement, and at the conclusion of your remarks, I will invite members of the committee to ask you questions.
Thank you, Senator Pratt. Honda Australia appreciates the opportunity to participate in this inquiry. We are a wholly owned subsidiary of Honda Motor Company Limited, selling and distributing vehicles and parts in Australia since 1969. We directly employ 160 people. We have 104 dealerships across the country, all of which are independent franchisees, and they in turn employ approximately 1,800 staff. In 2020, Honda will sell approximately 29,000 new vehicles in the COVID-impacted market, affording us a market share of approximately 3%. We pride ourselves on a reputation of quality and reliability that is valued by many customers in Australia and around the world. I think, as this committee has already heard, the Australian automotive market is arguably the most competitive in the world, with 67 brands competing for a total volume of just over 1 million units per year. As such, the relationship between dealers and distributors is extremely important for the continued success of the Honda brand. We recognise the need to work cooperatively to deliver the best outcomes for customers. And like many brands, we engage regularly with individual dealer operators and our dealer council, working together to resolve issues. The business model in the automotive industry has effectively not changed in well over half a century. It's complex. It's a complex business of new cars, used cars, service, warranty, parts, finance and insurance. And it's getting more complex with electrified, autonomous and connected cars. And I think, as this committee has heard, at the same time, it's fragmenting with car sharing and many online services, just to name a few. On top of this disruption, the industry has just clocked over 31 months of consecutive declining sales, noting that the downward trend was well established prior to COVID. So the business model of today has served us well, but in our view, it's outdated, it's broken, and it must change. It is simply not sustainable, and the outcome will be disastrous unless we at Honda change. In May 2019, we openly discussed with our business owners these challenges and the uncertainty of the future. We informed our dealers that we were conducting a full review of our business, with the aim to report back with a sustainable business plan for Honda and its dealers into the future. It took us 9 months to complete this detailed review. In March this year, we announced our intention to change our business model from July 2021 to ensure our survival, 2 years prior to the conclusion of our current dealer agreement. These changes included, amongst other things, transitioning to a more premium positioning with lower volumes, requiring significant changes to our dealer network, and also changing to an agency model for new cars. This decision was very significant, and it is purely aimed at securing our long-term future. We are 100% committed to the Australian market, but we need to be viable to be sustainable. Failure to be sustainable will see more brands exit. We understand these changes are tough on dealers, particularly those who will not continue their journey with Honda. It's emotional and it's never easy to receive these difficult messages. We undertook a thorough and objective and considered process to determine which dealers would form part of the new agency model. We did not target specific dealers or arbitrarily preference some dealers over others. We have also adopted a consistent and transparent approach to our dealings with the exit dealers since our announcement was made. This included a process of consultation and a compensation framework, which in our view is fair and reasonable. The framework aims to put dealers in the position they would have been in had their dealer agreement been performed by Honda to the end of its term. We partnered with leading accounting firm Deloitte to help us manage this process. At no point has Honda, either directly or through Deloitte, have we engaged in any intimidation tactics or placed undue pressure on dealers to accept compensation packages. Each dealer was given the opportunity to put in submissions and engage individually. We answered any queries the dealers had and liaised on their submissions and thoroughly assessed the submissions that were made. We also encouraged the dealers to obtain independent professional advice, which many of those dealers have done. We gave 15 months notice and we actively participated in mediations that more often than not yielded results. Now, as I'm sure you can appreciate, it would be inappropriate for me to disclose specific details about what was discussed confidentially and agreed with some dealers. However, I would like to tell this committee that we have come to a commercial resolution with over 80% of these exiting dealers, with more expected to come in the coming weeks. Going forward, we are working with each dealer to ensure that the wind down of their Honda business is done in a smooth and respectful way, ensuring dealers can continue to operate during the transition period and customers can continue to receive a high quality service. We are very excited about the introduction of the agency model from 1 July 2021. Under the agency model, our Honda representatives will sell new vehicles on Honda's behalf rather than in their own right. This will apply to the sale of new vehicles only. We believe that the changes to our model will lead to an improved customer experience, making it more transparent, making it simpler and more enjoyable for customers. One of the features of this new experience will be the introduction of price certainty across the network. We believe this will give customers greater clarity and remove the pressures, often unwanted, associated with buying a new vehicle. For many months now, we have been working closely with the remaining dealers and expect that they will form part of the agency model. And we've also been working closely with the National Honda Dealer Council. And we're currently working to finalise the terms of this new model. So I thank you for giving me the opportunity to make this opening statement, and I'm happy to take any questions that you have. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Collins. Can I ask, in terms of your existing dispute resolution procedures and that are contracted for, well, that exist as part of your existing arrangements, some of which have changed with former dealers. Can you give us an outline of how you're going about resolving any disputes associated with your change in model?
So, Senator, we back in March, late March of this year, met with all of our dealers, the remaining dealers and also the exiting dealers, one-on-one to explain the results of our review and what the process would be going forward. So we partnered with Deloitte and set up what we called a dealer relations office. And this was set up to take submissions from the dealers who we will no longer be part of our network as part of the discussion and consultation with regard to the compensation framework. So this was a process that was documented to all of those dealers, how that would work, what submissions we would consider, and what would be the time frame of those discussions. So this process we saw was really very effective in having the open lines of communications. Now, I have to say that these discussions are tough. These are very tough discussions. Some of these businesses, I think, as this committee has heard, are long-established businesses. So, they're tough discussions, but we had a very transparent and I think well-documented process for how the consultation would happen. If in a number of the instances that reached agreement, we reached agreement with individual operators. Where we were not able to reach agreement through that process, we actively participated as we should in mediation. And again, many of those discussions in mediation yielded successful commercial outcomes.
Any changes have been made to those exiting arrangements based on those negotiations?
Sorry, Senator, can I just ask you to repeat that question?
Have any changes been made in relation to those exiting arrangements and compensation arrangements based on those representations?
Absolutely, they have. So the process was submission of financial information, as well as so our framework, if you like, covered a number of different areas. So our framework, in particular, covered lost profits for the remainder of the term of the agreement, as well as a rental component, capital expenditure, as well as wind-up costs of buying back stock of both new vehicles and parts. So throughout this process, dealers, as a part of their normal financial reporting to us, provide us their financials. We allowed, through Deloitte, for the dealers to submit to us any changes or any variations to that financial data. And I would have to say, I can't go into specifics, but I would absolutely suggest that in the vast majority of the cases, we erred on the generous side where a submission had been made, which was over and above the dealer financial information that we had.
Can I ask in that context if a dealer felt that they were still unsatisfied with that outcome relative to the investments that they had made, are there any further steps that you are taking? Are there legal avenues? Ultimately, it has to be a sense of your contractual arrangements in terms of how they are ultimately separated.
So, Senator, ultimately, if we weren't able to come to an agreement through the actual consultation process that we initiated, we participated in all mediations, and again, that yielded some very good outcomes, I think, from both sides. Where we have had a small number of mediations that have also failed, and I guess ultimately, the courts will decide on determination of law. So we have a very small number of dealers that remain unresolved. We're still working actively with those dealers to resolve those matters prior to court action.
Thank you. Senator O'Neill.
Thank you very much, Chair. If I could just get on the record, Mr. Collins, just because every organisation is a little different, do we still have Mr. Collins?
Yes.
Oh, great. Thank you very much. You just disappeared off our screens for a moment. We don't want Honda to disappear.
No, I can see you.
We don't want Honda to disappear, Mr. Collins. So in terms of your role, are you the equivalent of the CEO of Honda Australia?
So, Senator, I'm not the CEO. We have a Japanese expat CEO. His name is Hiroyuki Shimizu. I can provide the details later if you like on the spelling of that.
Thank you.
So he is the CEO and Managing Director. I'm an executive, one of two local executive directors at Honda Australia. So I'm certainly most suited to answer any questions that the committee may have.
Okay. But, sorry, what was the gentleman's surname, the CEO?
Shimizu, Shimizu.
Shimizu. Mr. Shimizu,
Yes.
he doesn't work in Australia. He runs the business from...
Yes, he does.
Oh, he works in Australia. Where does he operate out of?
Out of our head office in Melbourne, with sitting alongside me.
Okay. So is there a reason why he wasn't able to be here today?
I'm the most suitable person to be able to answer any of your questions, Senator.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Collins. You gave evidence today that there are 104 dealerships, 1,800 jobs. Do you know how many apprentices?
I don't have that information at hand. It would be several hundred, but I can take on notice the exact number.
If you could take that on notice, I'd appreciate it. Those numbers, do they match the peak of Honda's presence in Australia? What's your peak numbers?
In terms of number of dealers, it would be very close. I would suggest that our peak might have been 107, so very, very close in terms of the actual dealerships nationally. In terms of...
Go on.
Sorry, Senator.
Go on.
In terms of employees, I would say that the employee number varies often by the cycle, I guess, of different franchises. So I would suggest the peak of employees, I don't have the exact number with me, but it would have been back in 2007, which was the peak of our sales.
Right. If you could take that on notice, that'd be great. And the same with apprenticeships.
Yes, I can take that.
And any other traineeships that you have. Okay. Now, if I can go to July 2021, how many dealerships will you have then?
We're still finalising that, Senator, but I would expect, because we are still in discussions with future dealers, but I would expect in terms of dealerships, we will have close to 100.
So when I have received evidence that indicates that there are 30 to 40 Honda dealerships that are being terminated under the new model, that doesn't fit with those numbers.
So, Senator, we are changing the representation model. So perhaps if I give you an example, it might provide clarity. So particularly in metro markets, I'll give you the example. We have, for example, in Melbourne, we have 14 dealerships in Melbourne. I think it's 11 or 12 owners. So we are reducing the number of ownerships to a much smaller number. So we will have in metro markets a smaller number of owners, and we are moving to what is called a hub and spoke model. So the smaller number of owners will have multiple sites. So the actual representation in terms of being able to get cars serviced or purchase vehicles will be quite similar to what it is today. The ownership structure will be quite different.
So there will be no reduction in the number of sites for Honda distribution?
There may be a small number, but it will be small.
And okay, all right, that's quite interesting. So if you could give me the pre-franchise, the franchise model and then the agency model footprint, I would appreciate that so that I could understand it.
So,
on notice.
So the actual footprint for agency, we won't have finalised until the end of this year.
I do understand that. I do understand that, and I won't hold you to it. But I do want to get an indication of what's the shape of it going forward.
Sure. We would be happy to provide it.
Thank you. Does Honda acknowledge that they've terminated many Australian Honda dealers effective of 1 July 2021, even though those dealers had agreements with Honda which do not expire until the 30th of June 2023?
So we absolutely provided notice to 24 owners across 28 sites that we would be cancelling those agreements.
And did you provide prior notice to the dealers of these terminations?
We provided notice in March of this year. So I think, as I said in my opening statement, we had provided notice to the entire network that we were doing a full review. That was back in May of 2019. And we provided notice to those dealers one-on-one in March of this year.
And for the record, did Honda inform the dealers that the rationale for the termination of mass dealer agreements is that Honda Australia are losing $200 million per annum in Australia due to exchange rates with Thailand?
We informed the dealers that the reason for our decision was numerous factors. One of those factors was the financial viability of Honda Australia.
Thank you. That was your general evidence, but I've asked a specific question. Was one of the factors that you raised with your dealers that Honda Australia are losing $200 million per annum in Australia due to exchange rates with Thailand? Is that correct?
So I don't believe we ever said how much it was, because that is confidential information. But certainly we were very open and transparent with the dealers that the weak Australian dollar was having substantial financial impact on our business.
And it could potentially be in the order of $200 million, is that correct?
Again, that's confidential information, but I can say it was very, very significant, Senator.
There are conditions in which we can encourage you to tell on the public record what's going on, and I'll ask you to give consideration to that. I mean, this is for the Australian people that we get these facts on the record. Commercial in confidence doesn't really cut it here, so if you can just be mindful of that going forward. Can I ask again? It's been reported to me that Honda Australia made representations to dealers that that they were losing $200 million per annum in Australia due to exchange rates with Thailand. Is somebody...
So as I said, Senator, we were very open with our dealers that the weak Australian dollar was causing severe financial impact on our local operations. I don't believe we ever exactly spoke about the exact dollar amount, but we were very open, both at the dealer council level and also in some individual dealer discussions about the impact of the weak Australian dollar on our business.
But you did have those discussions, and I should actually believe the record of multiple people who reported it to me, I expect. How much did Honda Australia show in profit before tax for the financial year ending 31 March 2020?
Our profit, I don't have that exact figure here, but we certainly reported a profit, and I think, as you may or may not know, we have an advanced pricing arrangement in place with the Australian Tax Office and the National Tax Office of Japan that means we need to fall within a range of local profitability. I don't have that exact number in front of me, but certainly we fell within that range.
So, Mr. Collins, would it be in the order of profit for the year ending 31 March 2020 of $34.85 million?
It would be within that range, yes.
How much did Honda Australia show in profit before tax for the financial year ending 31 March 2019?
Again, Senator, I don't have those figures at hand.
Would it be in the order of $54.6 million, Mr. Collins?
I don't have that figure at hand, so I don't want to speculate.
Mr. Collins, you are the director and you've told me that you're best placed to answer my questions. The profitability of your business, I think, is something that you should be aware of. You haven't got the figures at hand, but I am asking you if the profit before tax for the financial year ending 31 March 2019 for Honda Australia was in the order of $54.6 million. I would expect you might be able to recall if that's somewhere near the truth.
Again, I don't have that figure in front of me. It may well be within that range.
Does it sound about right, Mr. Collins?
It could well be right, yes.
Thank you. And I will ask you to take that on notice to be 100% sure. In the same financial years, in your financial statements, you've not included information relevant to the developments in the group as it may prejudice the group under the heading likely developments. What do you mean by prejudice the group?
Look, I'm not aware of that, Senator, so I can't answer that question.
So you're the director of Holden Australia. I'm asking you about your financial statements, and it says that you've not included information relevant to developments in the group as it may prejudice the group, and that came under the heading of likely developments. Were the likely developments the plan that you were hatching to change the business model and move from a franchising model to an agency model?
Just to correct you, Senator, I'm actually the director of Honda, not Holden. So
Sorry. It's been a preoccupying brand in my mind.
I'm sure.
Yes,
sure.
as the director of Honda, Mr. Collins, thank you for the correction. Can you answer my question?
Look, I don't have that information at hand. What I can categorically say is that the decision that we made to restructure our business, which was a very difficult decision, was made in very early March of this year. So what wording is in our financial statements, which I don't have in front of me, I'm unable to comment on, but the decision that we made in terms of our restructuring was, which I was involved in those decisions, was in early March of this year.
So could you take on notice what you meant and give a full explanation to the committee of what you meant by may prejudice the group? Would Honda Australia accept the non-disclosure was more likely to prejudice Australian Honda dealers than any other party?
Again, Senator, I don't have that information in front of me, so I can't answer that question.
Okay. It's been reported that, you'll take that on notice if you can, thanks. It's been reported that Honda dealers are not satisfied with the compensation being offered. In fact, we've heard evidence of a current court dispute that you're having with one of your most successful car dealers, and we had report which you alluded to in your opening remarks about intimidatory behaviour. Would Honda Australia acknowledge that terminated dealers were offered compensation which a large number of dealers consider is inadequate?
No, what I would say is that we have resolved 80%, just over 80% of the disputes. So I would suggest that the vast majority think it's reasonable.
Would Honda acknowledge the compensation doesn't include any payment for redundancy costs of the Australian dealers?
Yes.
Nor does it include loss of value to the substantial property costs of owned purpose-built Honda dealerships?
There is a capital expenditure component to our compensation, and we've worked through that with each individual dealer.
You may have worked through it, but it is not considered adequate by many of those that you've been dealing with. Is that correct, Mr. Collins? It's a point of contention in almost every negotiation.
I don't think that's correct, Senator. Again, I would refer to the fact that over 80% have been commercially resolved.
People walking away because they can't stand the pressure anymore or they're worried, cutting their losses and running from situations is often described quite comfortably by the language that you're using. I'm trying to get to the detail. In terms of the 80 that you consider successfully negotiated, how many of them disputed the loss of value to the substantial property costs of owner purpose-built Honda dealerships?
I think it would be a very small percentage, Senator.
So there were very few capital concerns about capital investment?
There was capital discussions, and I was in on every single one of those discussions and the mediations. So
did people ask for more than you were willing to give, Mr. Collins?
Yes.
And they finally signed. How many of them were happy when they signed, Mr. Collins?
We came to a commercial outcome. It's never easy, Senator. And
especially when you're the little guy. Hey, when you're a small business against a big multinational like Honda, you haven't got much power in those negotiations, have you?
So I would deny any intimidation of any dealers within any of these discussions. So whether the dealer
Why
is
are they
large or
reporting
small,
it to the Senate then, Mr. Collins? Why are Australian business people who are pretty resilient You know, they have a pretty good go. They get out there and they do their best. We've got the number one successful trader for Honda in Melbourne appealing to the Senate, saying we had an agreement. They walked away. They've used all their power. They've employed Deloitte's. We've been intimidated, and we haven't got any adequate compensation. They're not going to pay us anything for redundancy costs. We're not covered properly for our capital investment. That's what we're hearing from small businesses, Mr. Collins. Successful businesses.
So, Senator, I reject any comment that we were intimidating in any way. We had an open, transparent framework. We had an open, transparent communication. We've been to mediation in absolute good faith. So I would absolutely deny any intimidation whatsoever.
An open and transparent communication from one powerful entity to a less powerful entity doesn't always look like open and transparent communication to the less powerful person. I'm sure you're aware of that, Mr. Collins.
Yes, I can understand that could be the case.
So how did Honda determine which Australian dealers would be granted an agency model?
So, Senator, again, I do not plan to go into the detail, but we had a very objective process of selecting which dealers we would continue with in the future. I'll give you some examples. So, of course, performance in terms of sales performance is one component of that. Cultural fit to our future model is also another component. Customer satisfaction, whether that be customer satisfaction on the sales side or on the service side. So my memory is that there was close to a dozen different criteria, which we objectively, without favour whatsoever, went through dealer by dealer, state by state, market by market, with no variation whatsoever to that criteria.
Can you provide that criteria on notice to the committee?
I would need to check on the confidentiality of that. So let me take that on notice, Senator.
You can talk to the Secretariat about whether it needs to be confidential, but I'm certainly interested in seeing the 12 criteria that you used and any other further documentation about how you then implemented that. Does Honda Australia acknowledge that the agency model and planned agreement forces dealers to transfer their customer data ownership to Honda for no compensation?
So, Senator, our view is that the data is jointly owned between us and the dealer.
Do you have an agreement to that end?
Beg your pardon?
Do you have an agreement to that end? Is that documented in any way?
I don't think it's documented specifically within our dealer agreement, but that's certainly our view. And
so you've just asserted your right to data, but there is no formal agreement of the kind that we heard from Toyota with their dealers.
Our view is that the data is jointly owned.
That's your view. There is no formal agreement to that end. That's just your view. Is that correct?
We have no formal data sharing agreement.
Do you believe that does Honda Australia believe that customer data is worthless, of no value?
Clearly, I would say that data is clearly has some value. It is very, very clear within our agreement that we believe that the data is jointly owned. So,
in which agreement are you referring to there, Mr. Collins? Because you just told me that you don't have a data agreement, which was hard negotiated by the evidence of Toyota, both the National Toyota Dealers Association and Toyota Australia. They worked very, very hard to come to an understanding of this incredibly valuable asset that they both wanted to share, which is customer data. Honda never established a formal agreement with any of the Honda dealers around the sharing of data. Is that correct, Mr. Collins?
Separate to the existing deal agreement, that is correct.
But in the shift of your business model from a dealer network to an agency model, you are subsuming all of that data and claiming it as your own for redistribution at your discretion. Is that correct, Mr Collins?
So, Senator, we believe it's jointly owned.
You believe it is, but you have no documentation and you don't have formal agreement from your dealers.
Our view is that it's jointly owned.
Sorry?
Our view is that it's jointly owned. We do not have a separate agreement, as I've said, but we believe it's jointly owned.
So if I believe that my neighbour's car should be mine, I don't have a right to take it. It's theirs. They own it. They have value. They use it. If a car dealership has data and it's of so little value that you are not willing to pay for it, why are you taking their data, Mr Collins?
So, Senator, if this is in reference particularly to the compensation package, the principle of our compensation package is to put the dealer in the same position had they have been in, had the period of the contract been continued until the end. So our view is that that's a component of loss of profit, as well as rent and capex, and as well as exit costs, not customer data.
So if your contention is that the data is jointly owned, even though there is no agreement, how much compensation did you give people for taking their data?
I've already outlined our compensation components, and it does not include customer data.
Could you say that again, Mr Collins? You just broke up.
So I've just outlined the components, the high-level components of our compensation package, and specifically, there's no specific component of customer data. It's with reference to loss of profits, capex, rental component, as well as wind-up costs, etc.
So effectively, you want their data, you're taking their data, you claim it's jointly owned, but it's of no dollar value. Otherwise, you would be compensating them, Mr Collins.
We believe it's jointly owned, Senator. I'm sorry to keep repeating myself, but that's our view.
I'm sure the Honda dealer is a lot more sorry that you keep repeating that too.
If it's joint, can I just ask, if it's jointly owned and you want to assume entire ownership of it, does that not mean it should be part of a compensation package?
Our view, Senator, is that the compensation package which we've provided essentially puts the dealer in the same position had the contract been seen through to its end.
Chair, I've got another few questions if I can press on.
Yeah, we are over time already, so if you can conclude in the next 2 minutes. We are 10 minutes over.
Thank you very much, Chair. So just some quick answers if I can. With regard to new agreements, the committee's heard evidence of a transition agreement that you're asking Honda dealers to sign, which waives their rights to compensation if they then do not sign the new agency agreement. Is it correct that this transition deed can forfeit some of their legal rights under the agency agreement, even though they've been deprived of the opportunity of reading it?
No, that's not true, Senator. So we've provided a transition agreement to all of our future dealers some weeks back. That was provided to them at the same time that we provided the full agency agreement. So we've provided all that documentation, and the signing of that transition deed really is for dealers who sign on to our agency agreement, and it really just governs what happens in the transition. So I would just say on that front that we have provided a lot of this information to all of the remaining dealers since March of this year. Yes, it has evolved as we've discussed with our dealer council, but we have been very open in providing all that documentation and opportunity for consultation with those remaining dealers.
My understanding is the agency agreement that you say that you've provided is simply a model of one, that it's not particular to any of the businesses. I ask again, why are you asking dealers to sign transition agreements that limit their legal rights to compensation? It doesn't sound like it's a very much of a genuine partnership. It sounds like it's quite one-sided.
Senator, we believe it is absolutely a partnership. Just let me explain very briefly. Back in March, we provided a term sheet which was a precursor to our agency agreement. Some weeks back, we provided all of our dealers with the agency agreement in the form that we'll be asking those dealers to sign. It was not personalised to every individual dealer because we wanted to give all of our future partners the opportunity and plenty of time to to understand the content of that.
And each one
We
of
will be
those is
going out.
identical and they will all be given the same terms and conditions. Is that correct, Mr Collins?
Correct.
When a dealer signs a new agency agreement, will Honda guarantee the financial performance under the agreement if it declines in the first 1 or 2 years and therefore pay compensation to Australian small business owners?
So we will not be guaranteeing. However, Senator, I will say that within the actual standard, which I refer to within the agency agreement, there is upfront a compensation component to that should we not see out that deal agreement. So we, as per the changes in the franchising code, we have already put that into the future franchise agreement.
If I can just,
agency agreement, I should say.
if I can just go to
One more, Senator O'Neill.
the evidence that we received with regard to Astoria Honda, which is now on public record, shows that you're in dispute with Honda, Astoria Honda, and that you've employed Deloitte to communicate with them and existing dealers. Was Deloitte employed by Honda Australia, specifically the section of the firm called the Restructuring Services, because of its experience in insolvency and administration? And can I ask, why did you terminate Astoria Honda's agreement, and did you receive legal advice prior to terminating dealer agreements in respect of Australian law?
Yes, of course, we received legal advice. We appointed Deloitte for their experience on both the OEM and the dealer side. As you may be aware, Senator, Deloitte have a very, very large dealer services operation as well. So we believe they, one, were a global leading accounting firm, but secondly, were able to provide balance to some of these very difficult discussions.
Senator O'Neill, I'm going to have to close it off.
Sorry, can I just ask a yes and a no question? If the principles for new car dealership agreements were made mandatory, or if arbitration becomes mandatory, would Honda Australia leave Australia?
No.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Very, very kind of you.
Thank you.